We're up to 30 ratings on the iTunes Store and reviews from Lemon Freshman, American Splendor, Luphobie, Blodgett, JXDXBX, Anon Fan, Early Man, Charles Mons. If you would like to help improve the show, be sure to leave a review on iTunes yourself. Just search the Marketplace of Ideas, find the page on iTunes, and below there at the very bottom, you can find a place to leave your star rating and your comments telling us what you like about the show, what you dislike, what you want to hear more of, less of, whatever you want. But this will help the show attain its goal of 10,000 subscribers by the end of 2011. Ambitious? Certainly it's ambitious, but what ambitious goal isn't worth doing? Or what should I say? I should say what unambitious goal is worth doing. That's a better put. So help us reach this level of ambition, this grand 10,000 subscriber level, by leaving your review on iTunes. Just search for the Marketplace of Ideas, and the space is right at the bottom of the page. Thanks. This week on the Marketplace of Ideas, it's a conversation with Mark Frauenfelder, co-founder of Boing Boing and author of Made by Hand, Searching for Meaning in a Throwaway World. It's the Marketplace of Ideas. I'm Colin Marshall. Mark Frauenfelder is the editor-in-chief of Make Magazine, a former editor at Wired, as well as the founder of Boing Boing, which in its current iteration is just an insanely popular blog. I don't even have to tell you about it because you already know about it, you entire listening audience. His latest book, in any case, is Made by Hand, Searching for Meaning in a Throwaway World. Mark, welcome to the program.
Thanks a lot, Colin.
I feel like I've gotten to know publishing well enough at this point that I have to assume it was just great. Your publisher loved the hook that here's this guy who, to some people's minds, embodies the internet, who has suddenly turned around and started raising chickens himself and making cigar-box guitars. How much could we characterize the book as a quest for a sort of balance?
I think that is a really good description of what it was, because I do spend a lot of time just sitting behind my computer, writing and blogging and editing articles and things like that. And, you know, I'm not really using my hands other than moving a mouse around and tapping a keyboard. And so the book was kind of my exploration of opportunities to use my hands in meaningful ways. So that included, raising chickens and becoming a beekeeper and making musical instruments, learning wood carving, and those kinds of things. And so, it was a chance to get outside, a chance to connect with my kids and my family, and to make things that have, a useful purpose in my life.
It makes me think of this one thing Brian Eno wrote, and I'm sure you've heard of him saying this, which is his complaint made many times over the course of his career, I would imagine, that computers use one little finger of ours when we have, the human body has all this variety of muscles. Here we are using a few of them. I'll give him more than the one finger, but we're using such a limited range. How long did that take you before you started thinking to yourself, oh, geez, I don't feel so good using just the parts that need to interface with the computer?
I mean, I've been feeling that all along ever since I've been using computers, and that's why I like doing things like taking walks or riding my bike and doing exercise like that. But this, it took it to another level where you're actually really engaged with all of those muscles and you're thinking at the same time, which is a really good combination. And you probably heard the expression learning with your hands or thinking with your hands. And it's really true that I think your hands are an important part of the thinking process. And when they're active in doing something, it really does put you into a kind of a different brain state, like a flow state.
And reading the book, you have a bit in there where you describe your originally coming on board with Make Magazine before the launch and describing how you expected certain numbers, but it got even better numbers of subscribers than you'd even thought it would. How much do you think there was a wider, I don't know if longing is the right term, but a wider sort of desire to get beyond the sort of ways people had generally learned to interface with technology, i.e. through a graphical user interface in many cases?
Yeah. I think this is just my guess, but from my observations, I think it might be true. For the last 15 years or so, the kind of person who is interested in kind of creating things using technology, that kind of person became fascinated with the World Wide Web. It was this kind of uncharted territory that was just begging to be developed and experimented with. And so for the last 15 years, these kind of nerdy, geeky people have been, developing the web and turning it into this amazing place that it is. But they're starting to kind of look up over their monitor and realizing that the world around them is like this great hackable platform too, and that they can apply that creativity to the real world.
Now, you talk in the book a bit about sort of you allude to the earlier days you had with working with technology, and I think about how computers must have been like, say, in the 70s, in the 80s, certainly before I was using them. But when you go back far enough, is it accurate to say that at some point, using computers was hands-on DIY sort of stuff? This was handmade technology before a certain point in time, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think the kinds of, before personal computers became easier to use and easier to maintain, electronic hobbyists were interested in these kinds of things. And so they were actually, designing their own computers or other electronic equipment. And you saw that in, magazines like Popular Electronics and Popular Science and Popular Mechanics. They were loaded with projects that people could do to make things. And it wasn't until, I think the World Wide Web revolution that kind of thing kind of fell by the wayside. And also, technology, I think people were kind of makers by necessity a longer time ago because electronics were really expensive and you did have to kind of maintain your own things. Yeah, I remember when I was really young, when our TV set would break, my dad would take the back off the TV and pull the tubes out of the television, and you'd go down to the corner drugstore and you could plug the tubes into this machine they had in the corner, and a little meter would tell you if the tubes were good or not, and then you could buy replacement tubes for it. So people had kind of a more active relationship with the well-being of their technology. They wanted to make sure that it didn't break down because replacing it was really expensive, a lot more expensive than maintaining it. Today, TVs are much cheaper, and when they break, you can't even open them really if you wanted to because they're glued together. So you just throw it away and buy another one.
Would you say, or how much would you say, by virtue of your interests and by virtue of what you have done as your career, that you have always been a little more, you've always related a little more actively to your technology, always been a little more of a maker in terms of the things you use?
I would actually say that I was interested in do-it-yourself media a lot more than I was with physical things. I, had a zine. My blog, Boing Boing, was actually a zine in the 80s. And then when the web came along, I got really interested in blogging. The nice thing about DIY media, especially on a computer, is that, Command Z eliminates any mistakes.
Yes.
And so that kind of, I was, I didn't like making mistakes. And when you make a mistake, if you're working on something, if you're building a chicken coop or a go-kart or something, if you mess something up, it's a lot harder to fix it. And so that was something that I explored in my book, and I discovered that all of these kind of alpha makers, people that I really respect who are great at making cool things, they don't have a fear of failure anymore. They make mistakes as much as anybody else does, but they just realize that that's an unavoidable part of it, and they don't make a big deal out of it or get overly upset if something goes wrong. And so that was kind of a philosophy that I forced myself to take on when I started doing these things. And it really helped a lot to keep that in mind.
And you certainly included that fantastic quote, which of course I didn't remember verbatim, but the one about failure being the great teacher. And, that resonated immediately with me because I thought for a second to myself, well, not only is failure a great teacher, it's kind of the only one. No matter what I'm doing, whether it's completely through a computer or whether, say, I were to make a table, I assume, because I've never made a table, that, the only way you're going to learn in an absolute sense is by failing and learning from that. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, I do agree. I think, certainly it is one of the most effective and fastest ways to learn when you make mistakes. And I think, from some of the brain research that I've been reading, the kind of neural circuits that are formed during learning are formed much more quickly and more indelibly from mistakes than through things like rote repetition or listening to a lecture or something like that.
The whole phenomenon of Control Z and what a boon that has been to us, the good old undo command. There's the issue of how you think differently when you're making something, when you're trying to learn something, when you're working on something, when you don't have Control Z around. And I mean, I read your book and I think about analogies in my own life. I happen to also make films, and there's a certain distinct difference psychologically when you're shooting on very, very, very cheap, almost not measurably cheap digital video, or whether you're shooting on actual celluloid film. It's not simply a case of you're spending more money, but the approach also feels different, just the mere approach to the project. Is there an analogy, do you think, for every sort of domain where you can make something on a computer or you can make something not on a computer, that you not only treat things differently, but you're in a different frame of mind from the jump when you're going with the sort of more expensive, more handmade, more physical way?
Yeah, I do think that's true. And I've heard that, even with writers who wrote using a typewriter and then when computers came along, started using computers, how it changed the way they wrote novels, and they were more thoughtful before. It involves more planning if you're doing something that if you're designing something that's not on a computer or using a computer, because mistakes have consequences. And so if you are using a computer, you can just kind of blindly forge ahead and experiment. There's advantages to that, but there's also something about that kind of thoughtfulness of being a little more cautious and using your imagination to kind of foresee consequences of taking an action when you're doing something with physical things.
Now, because you are a writer, I do want to get your perspective on this as well. You've mentioned writing, and some people sticking with typewriters. A surprising amount of novelists and such. I read about still using longhand, and so I tried it out myself for writing articles, and it was amazing. Not necessarily better or worse, but amazing the sort of difference in process that resulted in the way I thought about it. When you write, are you writing straight to a document file, or are you using other physical means before that? How do you do it?
I almost always write on the computer. Almost always. If I'm writing, a longer piece, I'll use an application called Scrivener. That's really great for research. You can, just drag web documents or any kinds of, snippets from online onto it. Storing interviews and things like that. On those occasions when I have written something by hand, like on an airplane or something with a notebook, it is a different process. I think you slow down more because there's more effort expended in writing with a pencil or a pen, at least for me, than using a computer. So it's different. And like you said, it's not necessarily better or worse, but it is a different feeling.
Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, I would say everyone listening to this, probably everybody in the developed world has seen Boing Boing. They've probably gotten into debates in the comments section on a Boing Boing post sooner or later in their lives. But what was Boing Boing like as a zine? I'm really curious about this.
I started putting it together in about 1988 with my wife. And at that time, we were really interested in things like cyberpunk science fiction and the independent comics movement, and especially the way that computers were becoming cheap enough that they were getting in the hands of people who could use them for creative purposes. And so kind of exploring the things that people who are interested in technology liked, that was kind of what Boing Boing was about. So we had, interviews with science fiction authors. We actually also had a lot of science fiction authors write nonfiction for us, like Bruce Sterling going to Akihabara in Tokyo and writing about that, or Rudy Rucker doing autobiographical comic strips for us. And so, it was really a lot of fun, and I enjoyed it a lot. And, I think a lot of that spirit is still in Boing Boing as it is, the kinds of things that we're interested in. You see a lot of comic books and alternative art and science fiction and creative uses of technology. So it really hasn't changed that much what our purview is.
So do you think do you think of it as rather an evolution purely in medium for Boing Boing, as in this is, if the internet hadn't been invented, we'd be seeing a lot of the same content, but still in the zine form today if Boing Boing, just continued as a zine?
I do think so. I mean, we even had a section in Boing Boing called Neurotica that was just like little quick hits of surprising things we read about in the media that are very similar to blog posts. So it was, in many ways was like a blog. And I think, in the last year or so, Boing Boing's actually started running regular original feature-length articles. So, in some ways it's becoming more like the zine again than it was a couple of years ago.
That is quite fascinating to see what differences a medium by itself can make, and what you're left with when you take the idea of the medium out of an entity like Boing Boing. What are you still thinking about at that time? And I'm not going to ask too many questions about early Boing Boing, but there is just something fascinating to me about the cultural, and this is all relevant to the grand theme of the interview, I assure you, but the cultural moment of those when Boing Boing was started, the late 80s, the early 90s, so much, for some reason, references to that time in technology and computing, in the internet. They've just come up a lot lately in what I've read. What impressions can you give us of just, I guess, your own view of technology at that time? Because it seems to be a time of, quote unquote history when the attitude toward technology was very different before it and very different after it. What can you tell us about right then?
So at that time, I and I think along with a lot of other people, just starting to get the inkling that the digital technology was offering people a chance to make media and get their message spread to a potentially pretty large audience. Desktop publishing made it so that people could make nice looking zines, and the corner Xerox store made it so that you could publish those pretty cheaply and send them out to people. And then, even more so were the bulletin board systems that people were setting up. And so, you had this whole network of people connected by modem, starting to share documents and files and discuss things. And Tom Jennings' FidoNet system allowed people to send messages that would kind of hop from bulletin board system to bulletin board system. It was like a really early version of the web or something, or an internet that people could access through phone lines. That kind of thing was exciting, and people were starting to imagine where it could go from there. And then I think writers like William Gibson and Bruce Sterling and the cyberpunk authors were looking at what was going on and kind of extrapolated and painted this future of a really networked planet. And that got people even more excited. And the virtual reality was starting to get, people were taking notice of that. And, in reality, things were pretty clunky, and virtual reality didn't work very well. And, there was nothing like the world that Neil Stephenson imagined in Snow Crash and stuff. But we were seeing technology move along pretty quickly, and we were reading about all these things. So it was really exciting. And I think a lot of these people who were inspired by all this actually did get into, developing the tools that allowed the World Wide Web to really spread. Things like the Apache server system and things like that were made by kind of science fiction geeks.
I talk to people about this sort of thing, and it seems like as the technology has advanced, as the internet has become less DIY, as computers have, as technology has done the same, there's been a great thing happen, which is that, as you know, the audience for anything you do on the net has just exploded, as you can see in the size of Boing Boing's audience, for instance, many of whom might not have bothered to go on the internet 10, 15, 20 years ago. But at the same time, some people I talk to say something has also been lost in that exchange. Do you agree?
A lot lost. Could you maybe rephrase? I'm not exactly sure.
Okay, yeah, it's a tough concept in a way. I mean, even for me to understand, but as technology for the net has gotten more widespread. It's gotten easier to use. Basically, anybody can get on it. It has been a net, as it were, good, because it has increased what people can do on there, has increased who can go on there, your audience, and also the number of creators. It's increased pretty much everything. But I also talk to some people who see a certain downside to that, in that where he or she or whoever would have found maybe a certain type of engagement on the internet in say the early 90s. Now it's harder to find among, I don't know, a lot of talk about maybe search engine optimization or Facebook, for example.
Mm-hmm. I mean, are you kind of saying that the popularity of the internet and that there's so many people on it now makes it not as much fun as it used to be?
That's the thing. It's not what I'm saying, but it's what I'm trying to know, if what people who make similar complaints to me are saying.
Yeah.
Since you're embedded in a culture where I'm sure at some point you've heard a similar sentiment. I just wanted to get your idea about that idea of if anything has been lost in the whole explosion that has been good for the internet, but have there been downsides, I suppose?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's always fun at the beginning of any kind of a movement. You know, it's exciting times, and you're there with a lot of like-minded people who feel that they're together, you know, for a common cause, and they, you know, share a lot of similar interests. And then once that space has been kind of developed, then you kind of make it easier for other people to come in who don't necessarily share those values. They move in and you know, take over, because they're, you know, a much larger percentage of the population than the folks who were there earlier on. So I do see that. But I mean, the cool thing about the internet is that there's just so many different pockets. You can create your own pocket universe anywhere, and people will join it. You know, like the cigar-box-nation.com.
Yes, that's what I was going to bring up right away when I heard about when you mentioned the pocket. Cigar-Box Nation. I still can't believe it.
Yeah, so there's, you know, like 3,000 people from around the world who are cigar box guitar making enthusiasts, people who make musical instruments, you know, not only with cigar boxes, but cookie tins and oil cans and, you know, pieces of driftwood that they find. And they post their videos of playing it. They post their process photos of building them. They post instructions. They talk to each other about sources for materials, give tips to each other. And it's an amazing place. And I've learned a lot from them. And, you know, a really fine group of people who are really happy to share their knowledge and things like that. And there are groups like that for almost everything. You know, there's one for people who build autonomous flying drones. There are, you know, groups for people who raise and share praying mantises and praying mantis egg sacs. So whatever you want to find, there's a group out there, and you know, it's not infiltrated, you know, like, you know, it's the complete opposite of the comments section of a YouTube video post, you know.
And this is what was one of the most fascinating underlying elements of your book, in that you have this premise where you're going to do the activities that are so seemingly untechy and un-internety. Some of them are, of course, technology intensive in their sense, like modifying your espresso machine, but, you know, they're not considered to be activities where you need technology that people use every day, when they go on the net, when they use their computers. Yet, for all of these things, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think for every pursuit you do in here, from raising chickens to growing a vegetable garden to making gallon upon gallon upon gallon of kombucha, there is an internet community for all of these, and all of those communities were very important to you to accomplish these things outside of the internet, correct?
Yeah, they were tremendously important, and because it's become the place to go to report on what you've done and to find out what other people have done, and I'm thank goodness that people have this natural inclination to want to share information without being compensated for it. There, for some reason, and I think it might be something to do with the way we are wired from evolution, and sharing survival skills with other people in the tribe. But people love to show off what they've done. Also, oftentimes help other people. It's interesting, because there's this stereotype of the garage inventor who's really secretive about the things that he's made, and he's afraid someone will steal his ideas and stuff. But really, from what I've learned from both from Make Magazine and writing this book, is that these people are really open and eager to get novices started in doing the same kind of thing that they're doing.
And as far as Make Magazine goes, there's so much there to discuss as well. But are we seeing a wave of making going on in our current moment, or is this just are venues like Make Magazine merely exposing us to the making that was already going on? I may not be getting the distinction clear, but is there more making nowadays, or do we just know about more making, or how could we even tell if one were the case or the other?
I think there is more making going on. Part of it is what I said about kind of that, just people's response to having been, using their computers and playing video games and all that so long that they kind of forgot about making things, and they're rediscovering what, had been popular with their parents and grandparents. So it's kind of this rediscovery. And then the internet is really helping to accelerate the ability for people to make things. Plans for making things are really evolving quickly online, because things just move at a quicker pace. You see somebody's plans, like you go to instructables.com, you can say, well, here's a better way to do it, and you'll immediately get feedback. That was like I posted a ginger ale, make your own ginger ale recipe on Boing Boing earlier this week, and right away I got all sorts of great suggestions on how to improve the process and things that I could have done to make it safer and tastier and things like that. A long time ago, it would have been years and years before somebody would have come over to my house and tried my ginger ale and said, "Oh, I've made ginger ale before and you're doing it wrong. Here's how to do it." On the internet, it was 5 seconds, and I immediately started getting all these great ideas.
It seems like a true irony of this sort of story that, I just imagine myself, if I wanted to make a cigar-box guitar even in, say, 20, 25 years ago, I probably would have just stood around shrugging my shoulders unless I was somehow tapped into some kind of real-life meetup community of cigar-box guitar makers. Without the net, I don't think I would be able to do a lot of the things that allow me to escape the net. It's kind of weird, but kind of cool in a way. It's kind of like a hybridity in life, maybe.
I totally understand what you mean. For cigar box guitars, I think that it was something that happened in the South a lot, and people, their relative or, their father or an uncle or something had a cigar box guitar, and then the kid would say, "Oh, I want one," and they would learn that way. And that would really be the only way to do it. But with the internet now, your options of trying things out have really opened up, and it makes it a lot easier. And, there are physical, I don't want to discount like how great it is to actually meet up with other people in person, and there's these things called hacker spaces that are popping up all over the country where people chip in to pay the rent on a a place, typically like a, kind of a rundown storefront somewhere, put shop tools in there, and their monthly dues go towards workshops and being able to use the equipment and materials and things like that. Those are really a cool development in all this that I've been seeing.
I imagine for a lot of people who just get into making newly nowadays, they say to themselves, or rather they have to think to themselves or fight with a kind of preset switch that's been flipped inside their minds. When you're brewing your own kombucha, one might have to think, I've got to beat down the impulse of just going to buy it at the store, because I know that in the end, brewing it myself I'm going to gain more from it. But there's that stumbling block at the beginning, like, wait a minute, am I doing something dumb because I can go buy it? Now, for a lot of people, that might be true. Was that impulse ever there for you to have to defeat yourself?
Sure, yeah. I mean, don't knock convenience,
Yes.
Convenience is great, and I'm glad that I can go to the supermarket and buy all sorts of, huge variety of food inexpensively, or buy, gadgets and things like that. If that's all that I did, I would feel, something was missing from my life. And so by, kind of choosing the things that you want to do, just kind of a small set of all the different things, activities that you do in your life, and kind of taking more control and charge of those things, it can be more fulfilling in your life. And that was why I kind of focused on food in the book, was that I knew that, by working on projects that were about, producing food and doing kind of old school food preservation methods, that would have a daily effect on my life. Every single day I would be eating something that I made, or my family would be eating something that we made. And so it's really fulfilling and makes you have kind of you're more proud about that part of your life, and you're also more aware and observant too. When you make your own yogurt, you spend more time thinking about the way it tastes, and that kind of ripples out into other things that you do. You start tasting, the yogurt that you buy in the store and comparing it and stuff. So it makes you a more observant person, which I think is a great thing.
If you've just tuned in, this is the Marketplace of Ideas, and I'm Colin Marshall. My guest right now is Mark Frauenfelder. He was the co-founder of Boing Boing, the massively popular weblog, and he's the author of Made by Hand, Searching for Meaning in a Throwaway World. If you want to hear this talk again, be sure to visit colinmarshallradio.com, where the complete Marketplace of Ideas interview archive is, or you can find them all on iTunes. Just search for the Marketplace of Ideas, and that's also where you can leave a review of the show and make your voice heard yourself. If you have any questions, comments, any kind of other feedback, no matter what, send it along to Colin, COLIN, at colinmarshallradio.com. Now, let's return to the conversation with Mark Frauenfelder. I'll often talk to people who, friends who use the net a lot for work or what have you, or they're in what you might call the technology or knowledge worker industry, and they have to spend a lot of time doing everything they do in the world through the medium of a computer and the internet. And a lot of them do end up turning to the hobby of cooking at home, not necessarily making their own sauerkraut as you do or making their own yogurt, but it is very common that they will do a lot of cooking at home. And I'll ask them about this, and they'll say, well, it's got a physicality to it. It's got a very hardcore analogness that I do find lacking in what I do during the day. Do you think that, when you're making something like sauerkraut at home, for example, or brewing your own kombucha, there's an extension of that sentiment in these more makery food projects?
Yeah, I think so. Cooking is a really fun and fulfilling activity to do, and it is one that goes against the urge of convenience too. You can get really delicious prepared foods almost anywhere now, but to make it yourself, you're slowing down and paying attention to what you're doing and being observant, making decisions about it. So you're kind of you're challenging yourself in ways that are more involved than they would be if you were just like, picking something off of the shelf.
There is a bit at the beginning of your book, Made by Hand, when you talk about sort of the lifestyle that you and your family had come to fall into, and there's certain descriptions of them that you describe sort of a constant inflow of products, and you didn't seem to you describe. Would I be correct in saying you describe a bit of regret at maybe some awareness of neat stuff in life that had been lost during that opening before you had moved to the South Pacific, before you tried all these DIY projects? How would you describe what the feeling was about life at that time?
You mean before we left for Rarotonga?
Before all of this, yeah. Because I specifically want to narrow down to, there's just certain passages in the book where you talk about in a way that I'm sure was designed to induce some level of skin crawlingness in the reader, that you had a lot of stuff, a lot of cool stuff, no doubt, kind of flowing into your life, a lot of entertainment, a lot of gadgets, but it wasn't necessarily stuff that you found yourself valuing due to its sheer volume. Is that an accurate characterization?
Yeah, I think so. If you just end up being able to buy the solution to every problem that you have, or fulfill any wish that you have, then it's not as nice when you do get it. I've just noticed that when we would go out to dinner all the time, if you just eat out every night, then that experience isn't really special. But now that we have 2 kids, and we need to get a babysitter every time we go out, it's much less frequent that we go out. You enjoy that experience of dining out a lot more. It becomes different and enjoyable that way. And so it was that way with just the technological gadgets that we would get and things like that. If you're more selective about the things that you introduce like that, or if you have a hand in creating those things, then you become more appreciative of those things in your life.
Now, so as not to confuse any listener who hasn't read the book, or who hasn't kept up with this, or who did not read about this chapter of your life on the net or anywhere else, we did mention your move to the South Pacific island of Rarotonga. And I have to imagine, I've heard and read a few interviews with you about this book, but that tends to get latched onto is sort of as a core emblem of the book, is this opening move to Rarotonga. And was that? There's a certain way it's framed in the book which makes total sense in the context of the DIY journey you go on after. And when you made that move, how much of an inkling did you have that this was the direction you needed to go in life?
We were kind of just looking around for a solution, and I think moving there was not the answer, but we did kind of discover the seeds of the answer. We thought that by moving far away from Los Angeles, we would get away from the kind of complex life we had, where we would, just kind of buy everything we needed and get away from all of that. But the truth was, when we got there, we didn't really have much of a plan in mind, other than just being there in, a small tropical island in the middle of nowhere. And it wasn't until, we spent a lot of time there and frankly, we're kind of bored because we didn't have that much to do. We started really getting into food, and it's, like the coconuts that we found in the yard that would fall out of the trees. It turned out to be, quite an ordeal to husk the coconut and open them and extract everything. And you had to use like this coconut scraping bench, and it became this all-day event. And it ended up being like the most fun we had on the island was doing that. And so we would, really look forward to what we called Coconut Day. And then we would make scones or coconut pancakes and make coconut cream to put on the fish that we would buy there. And so that all of a sudden became the answer, was to get involved with making your food, and so when we got back, we continued doing that kind of Coconut Day thing, and kind of branched out into other things too.
Now, the example of moving to the South Pacific is an extreme example of what I have come to consider doing an experiment or performing an experiment on one's own life, in a sense. And, as is something like trying to kill your lawn and grow a vegetable garden on it. I consider it to be an experiment in life in the sort of, can I do this sense, or like, what will my life be like if I do this sense? And I've been thinking about it from your book and from other sources. It seems like performing experiments on your own life is kind of one of the great pleasures life has to offer, at least to my own mind. And I want to know, is that a way you've thought about it as well? Putting aside any notions of making or DIY as they've come to be defined, just experimenting with your life, seeing how your life will change if you do this, or if you set up this as a condition, or if you try changing your space in X, Y, or Z way. Is that something you think about as being, one of the sources of the joy of life?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really, really nailed it. It's so interesting to try those kinds of things and to experiment. My wife and I have tried different things. Like, we lived in London for a while, and we lived in Japan for a while, and kind of immersing yourself in a different culture like that, you really do like experience life in a different way, and think about the life that you had before in a different way, and it enriches your experiences and appreciation for the world. So definitely these kinds of experiments are a way to have a richer, more meaningful life. And so you really nailed it there.
And about the stumbling blocks that people might have when they want to perform these experiments for themselves. I mean, let's say a lot of people think to themselves, I feel like maybe I kind of want to move to England or Japan, or, wouldn't it be great if I could grow a vegetable garden or make my own yogurt? People say these things a lot, but no matter if you do it successfully, if you do it and have to do it a bunch of times, or if you never do it, there's always, I would imagine, the sort of the resistance at the beginning of any of these projects. What kind of resistance internally within yourself do you encounter for these sorts of experiments?
One of them is just leaving your comfort zone. It's hard to do that. You have a routine and it's working pretty well, and so it's you reach a point of, is the routine boring enough that I need to try something else? And once it hits that, then it's like, then you do it. And, you leave your comfort zone. You're going into an area you don't know a lot about. You're experiencing it on your own a lot of times, because there aren't other people who are interested in doing it with you. And so, it can be, and then there's just kind of that feeling too, am I doing something that's like really ridiculous and stupid? Why am I, even doing this? And, like, there were actually some things that I decided not to do. I was thinking it would be fun to generate my own electricity as much as possible by building this, it looks kind of like a stationary bicycle. It's got a giant plywood flywheel, and you pedal it, and it's basically a generator, and you can, charge up a bank of batteries, and some people use that to, heat their toast, or they do it to power their computer. But when you look at the efficiency of it and how much effort that goes into it, I realized I could be pedaling nonstop 24 hours a day, and I'd only be supplying like 1% of my family's electricity needs.
Yikes.
That would be, I thought that just, there's no payoff for that. And so that I did write that off. And I'm not knocking people who do like to do that. If they find value in doing that, that's good. I guess there's exercise involved and stuff. But for me, I wanted to focus on projects that were really kind of reasonable and had a lot of bang for the buck.
There is the element of, the trade-off, seeing if something makes sense when you pencil it out like that, seeing if it works out on the ledger. And it sounds, at this point, I would assume that any type of fear about these sorts of things, you've pretty much found a way around based on all you've tried so far in life, right?
Getting over the fear thing was a really good thing for me. The fear of making mistakes has been a really positive effect of all of this. And now when something goes wrong in the house, I am more inclined to try to solve it myself before calling an expert in. And I'm sure that things I do take a lot longer than it would take an expert to do, but yeah, I eventually get it done, and I have that kind of sense of self-efficacy now that makes that possible, and I think that's a really positive effect.
Toward the end of the book, toward the very end, there is the point made, and it's a very relevant point and important enough to be the last thing in the book, that when you're doing these projects, you're really making a change in yourself. And like you mentioned, there's that greater sense of self-efficacy, and there's what else is there, I guess, beyond that? There's a lot that changes even in the projects I do. I find that I'm not sure I can put a name to all of these things, but given the sort of making you've seen go on, given all the life experiments you've tried to do, I mean, can we sort of capture the full range of how people change themselves this way, or how you do it? Or, are there always sort of X factors that remain unknown? Like, I know I come out of this different, but I'm not sure how.
Yeah, well, I think, for everybody, it will lead them down different paths. But another pretty profound effect I think it's had on me is made me more curious about how the man-made world works. You start looking at the way, furniture is fastened and put together, how things are wired together. If I do have a plumber over, I'm really interested in their equipment and how they use it. Because once you start, getting more involved in the world and the world around you and taking responsibility for maintaining it, those kinds of things suddenly become a lot more interesting. It's like when and I think I talked about this a little in the book. My dad's a big do-it-yourselfer and does a lot of his own home wiring, and he's an electrical engineer, so he's allowed to do that. When he would do that, I didn't really pay any attention to it, but when he came out here to visit, we had to do some wiring for the automatic door opener on the chicken coop that I built, and we went down to Home Depot to buy the parts, and he knew exactly what to get and everything. And so I paid attention this time. When I was a kid or, younger, I never did. But now those kinds of things are interesting to me. So just changing the way I view the world, I think, has been a really good positive effect of all of this.
It reminds me of what they used to say about sort of the classic liberal education one would get in college, is that it makes the interior of your head a more interesting place to be. Would you consider that to be a comparable sort of sentiment to the one you have about what you get from making?
Yeah, I think so. It really does, because it gives you opportunities to challenge yourself all the time, and to use your creativity and critical thinking skills. There really is no time that I'm bored, because there's always another project that I want to be working on.
And out of curiosity, how many projects do you have going on at once? I mean, I suppose we could count the ongoing sauerkraut and ongoing yogurt and such as projects, but where do you estimate the sort of total making project count of Mark Frauenfelder at any one moment?
I don't have that many going on. I probably have like 4 going on right now, perfecting my ginger ale making skills. I need to go, get some new equipment for that. And then I'm working on a little gadget that keeps peanut butter stirred. So it doesn't, I buy the natural peanut butter that separates easily. And so this will keep it so that it's always nice consistency. The oil and the solid parts are mixed, because it'll rotate the little, it'll rotate the peanut butter jar every 24 hours. It'll rotate at 180 degrees. And then I'm working on a system to send an ultrasonic sound towards my neighbor's house, because we have a dog that's barking all the time at night, and the guy's like always gone. And so I bought this ultrasonic generator and an amplifier and some ultra tweeters that can play sounds that are above the hearing level. And so I'm hopefully, it will make it'll quiet the dog down.
I'm sure I know some people who would do anything for a system that effective if that turns out to work. I'm sure you've heard the same sentiment from many in response to that.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll see how it works.
The name of the book, once again, is Made by Hand, Searching for Meaning in a Throwaway World. Mark Frauenfelder, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Colin.
If you'd like to find out more about Mark Frauenfelder, Boing Boing, and everything he and they do, visit boingboing.net. This has been the Marketplace of Ideas. I've been Colin Marshall. You can hear this conversation again at colinmarshallradio.com, where the complete Marketplace of Ideas interview archive is, or you can find them all downloadable on iTunes. Just go there and search for the Marketplace of Ideas, and you can leave your review of the show there too as well, and help improve it. Send any questions, comments, feedback, whatever you have, to Colin at colinmarshallradio.com if you'd like. And be sure you visit benalthouse.com if you want to see the site of Ben Althouse, the man who produces our theme music. As always, thank you for tuning in. We will catch you next time.